Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Cover One Buffalo. I'm your host Aaron Quinn, and joining us for the first time in a while is our main man, the OG himself, Erik Turner. What's happening, my man?
What's going on, Aaron? Hey, sometimes you just gotta come on unannounced and just bring the house down. So we're
That's
gonna
right.
we're gonna try to wrap up these positions with obviously one of the Bills' biggest strengths, and that's the defensive backs.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to the show ever since we started this whole process of going through the position groups. Before we get into that, though, I do want to take a time out real quick here. First of all, anyone that was sitting on the YouTube page waiting for us to go live, sorry, we had a little bit of technical difficulties. We're going to fix those. We want people to join on YouTube live and interact with the chat group. So I know that was kind of a pain for anyone that was sitting there. We apologize, but we're here now. And also head over to cover1.net, man. We got a couple guys you want to announce. We got some new contributors to Cover One, so even more content coming out. You want to tell us a little bit about those guys?
Yeah, I mean, if you head over to the site, you can see some of their backgrounds and who they've written for. We brought on two new guys so far this week. First one being Nick, who is a really good X's and O's guy, something we've been looking for Cover One, but we're kind of expanding our coverage now. And we're kind of delving into the NFC East because Nick's going to be writing about the Giants and schematics for the Giants, and Alan is coming over and he's going to be writing for the Cowboys. So we're going to be doing a little more X's and O's for those people that love to learn and get more knowledge on the game. Those two guys are going to definitely bring it, and you're going to be able to see other teams now on the site, and that's kind of cool, especially for someone like me where I'd like to watch so much film, but I'm so zoned in on the Bills that I don't get to see a lot of other work or a lot of other film on these other teams. And so this will give us an opportunity to let those guys analyze that film and bring that information to us. It's gonna be cool to see on the site. And we're not done yet. We're gonna bring on a couple more guys, but stay tuned for that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And get over to cover1.net. If you're a fan, you obviously know the content's always coming up. Get over and download the app on iOS or Android because you get the notifications right to your phone when stuff comes up. And like Erik said, man, in the Slack channel, I'm just seeing these guys, dropping in for the editors. Hey, I got this new article. And I'm even having trouble keeping up. So it's nice when I wake up in the morning, I get my cup of coffee. I know there's going to be some fresh content popped up for me so I can consume, because this time of year, man, I can't get enough, man. I'm just sitting there waiting for something to happen, and Cover One's keeping me busy. And also, Erik, we talked about a little bit on the last show with Nate. You have some big news with the Athletic coming into Buffalo. So congratulations! I get to congratulate you in person or through the internet.
Through the interwebs. No, yeah. It's a long time coming, man. We started this back in 2015, and just a small little blog, and we started from the bottom, and we worked our way to the top. We started with the fan groups, the Bills Mafia fan groups and stuff on Facebook, and then I was posting to Reddit, and grew a really good relationship with the moderators and the community there. And it's crazy what the internet can do nowadays, because I didn't go to school for this. I played ball and obviously I coached a little bit, but to think that, you can build something like this and get the following big enough to where, you get nationally credentialed, it's pretty cool. And, the Athletic, the whole brand, it really falls in line with what Cover One really stands for. And obviously that's based in film, that's based in giving you, deep stories, not just those, clickbait articles. We want to give you something that you can, cling on to. And so I was, more than happy to join that company because I love what they stand for. And like I said, they kind of fall right in line with what Cover One has always stood for.
Definitely. And like I touched on in the last episode, this is great for anyone that follows the Cover One brand. It's obviously only going to get the Cover One brand more exposure to have you associated with the Athletic. So any of the premium subscribers too, I think the content's just going to continue to roll out. So get over there, get on the premium. $10, you can get the whole year from the time that you sign up. It's a deal you can't beat. We'll talk about it a little bit more at the end of the show, because I want to get into this one, man, especially now that I got you here. And something that before we get into it, actually, I want to talk about is following players on Instagram is probably one of my new most fun things. I tweeted out a picture of Shady working out with John Miller and Deion Dawkins. And you never really, up until the last couple of years with Instagram and the stories and stuff, you didn't get to see this inside look into this period of time because they're not around the team. So you don't get the training camp pictures and things like that. And to see how hard these guys are working, I think this time of year is something that I guess you don't really realize as a fan, and how cool it is and how much they put into their craft. Like a Shady at 30 years old, man, the guy's working his butt off every single day.
Yeah, that's what's great. You know, we were just talking about how amazing the internet is. Well, this is another one of those instances. You know, you tweeted out that picture of Shady and Deion Dawkins, and of course John Miller to his side. And you know, that's pretty cool because you know, a lot of people think once they leave Buffalo for a few weeks before training camp, a lot of people think they're just, you know, laying on the beach, you know, just relaxing, decompressing before they head to training camp. But that's absolutely not true. In fact, they actually ramp up their training. You know, they may take a day or two off after returning back home from Buffalo, but they're going to get right back into training because training camp's grueling. It is not fun. You know, sometimes you're running, you know, 2-a-days and in that hot weather out on the turf at Fisher. So you got to be in tip-top shape. And for a lot of these guys, you know, kind of like John Miller, you know, who was in the doghouse last year, he's got a lot to prove this year. And I think he looks ready. That's for sure. He looks ready. He's like I said in our Slack channel, I was like, man, he looks like he's about to throw some people out the club. And, you know, I'm excited because he's one guy that I'm looking forward to watching again this year.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you aren't on Instagram following the players, I think you should get on there just because that behind the scenes access is super cool to see. So definitely go over and do that. And while you're over on Instagram, go follow Cover One because we're over there too. So let's get into this though. Defensive backs, man, because it was really the highlight of the season last year. Going into the season, rated as a low group in league by a lot of the national analysts. Didn't really know what to expect out of Jordan Poyer coming over from Cleveland after being on the IR there for a year. Never really sprouted into what he did in Buffalo. You know, Micah Hyde obviously showed a bunch of potential. Never, again, didn't really put up the potential that people saw. A lot of the Green Bay analysts said, you know, the Bills bit too hard on that move. But they didn't. That whole unit played incredibly well. Obviously, the pick of Tre'Davious White. So coming into this second season with the majority of this group intact, obviously we lost gained Vontae Davis. What are you looking forward to seeing the most out of, you know, the communication, this group, year two in the same defense? What do you expect to see growth wise?
You know, that's a great question. That's, you know, it's something I asked Jordan Poyer when I did my first piece for The Athletic, because I sat in the film room with him and, you know, broke down some film. And he's like, you know, that's what's great about year two is that, you know, I'm going to be put in the same spots in the same roles that I was in year one, but you know, that playbook is going to expand for these guys in the secondary. You know, they're going to be asked to do different things. They're going to probably play a little more man, as something that we've always discussed, you know, behind the scenes at Cover One. They need to balance out their defensive coverage a little more. And I think with bringing most of those guys back and even bringing in Vontae, he seems to have taken well to the locker room and fit right in with those guys in the secondary that are returning. I just think that the communication is going to be that much better, and throw in a few more wrinkles, and maybe you get, you know, an extra interception here or there, or turnover here and there, and next thing you know, the offense is back on the field, you know, driving for a touchdown.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely early in the season, they, I don't know whether some of it's luck, you know, there's arguments on in the media of whether it's luck or if they can maintain it, but they seem to just come up with balls, especially there in the safety position, tipped passes, things like that. They just seem to always be in position. I think a little bit of it's luck, a little bit of it's knowing where to be and finding the ball. So I'm expecting to see a lot more of that again this year. Like you stated, the communication, I think the relationship that Hyde and Poyer have, you see it off the field, is huge for this defense. I think the defense really starts there in the backfield with the safeties. And if those two stay healthy and can play all year, and gain a second year, I think we're going to see really great things out of them.
You know, there's one thing I wanted to touch on before we move on with this.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lot of people say, you know, we got lucky. You know, we had a lot of tip passes and whatnot that turned into interceptions, and you know, there is some truth to that. But I got to give credit to these players, because after sitting down and talking film with Poyer, the one thing that stood out to me is that everything is vision based, and a lot of times that's not the case. That vision based is really leaving some leeway to these players, these talented players, to act upon maybe their film study or what their instincts are telling them or what they're processing. Not have to worry, not have to like totally stay by what they're told on the field or within the play concept itself. So McDermott has them playing in a way that it maximizes their instincts, and that's why they want those smart players in the secondary. And that was one thing that just stood out for me. You know, when he said everything is vision based in coverage, and you know we play a lot of zone, and that is typically the case with zone, but they're just not held by the construct of the play, and I love that. And you see plays like that by Jordan Poyer.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing because I felt like during the Rex years, they were held to Rex's vision more so than they were held to the players doing what they saw. And so you have an egotistical coach, and there's a lot of that around the league. And so I thought that was an interesting point you just made there. One thing I wanted to ask you about, because I'm not sold yet on it. I see people on Twitter that are, you brought up Davis and the addition of Davis to this roster. I like what he's saying. I like that his interest in Buffalo as a fan. I like that he's excited for the season. He's definitely got a lot to prove, right? He's on a smaller deal than I think he would have signed if he stayed healthy. Hasn't been healthy, hasn't been out on the field. Definitely a lot to prove, get back to where he was. Do you really think he can get there?
You know, if he's available, I think he'll be fine. I mean, he only played in about 330 snaps last year. But before that, I mean, he's held his own as far as being on the field. So he's obviously a veteran. He's seen it all. And he can play both man and zone. He can bump inside. He's got that versatility that everyone loves. And he's got a little chip, a little swagger to him. And McDermott and Frazier love that about players, guys that are trying to prove it. And I think he's another one of those guys, kind of like Micah Hyde coming in last year, that is kind of a misfit. And, his team gave up on him. So I like what he brings as long as he can bring it healthy. So I think that that's to be determined, but I do think he has all the talent in the world.
Yeah. And what is he? He's pushing 30 now. As well, I think. So I think that's where my concern is. When they signed him, you see a guy that has some injury history, pushing 30 years old. Obviously, the Bills fans will point to Shady being 30, but that's just an anomaly, I think. Shady is just a one-of-a-kind, just world-class athlete. Not saying that Vontae Davis isn't. I just have a little bit of question marks. And like you said, a lot of it's dependent on that health and availability. And that's great and all, but if he's not, the huge drop off here for this defensive backfield this year, not that there wasn't last year between Gaines and Sharice Wright, but I think it might even be more drastic this coming season. What do you think there after we get out of that top four? If something happens to a Davis or Tre'Davious White, where are we sitting depth wise?
I mean, I'd say we're still on par as last year but you could say that about any team. There aren't many teams that are going to be running 4 deep at corner. There aren't many teams that have the third corner, their slot corner can just bump outside. So I think you could really say that about any team, and that position is it's so critical because there's some of the better athletes on a team, and when they go down, any team's depth's going to drop, any team's talent's going to drop. You just don't really have 4 or 5 guys that you could just roll out. So while I do agree that the talent, drops off and the depth is probably not as strong as you'd like it, I think that's kind of, the status around the league just because of the position. Because it's, sure. You're running backwards. You're basically running backwards. Think about that. And you're trying to cover a guy that's running forward. It's not the easiest position to play, and you're trying to process everything that's going on in front of you. So I do think the talent, it does drop off, especially when you're talking about a guy like Phillip Gaines coming in or a rookie like Johnson. So it's going to be a drop off in talent, but I think the scheme and being in place and being in year 2 of this defense also may help, the secondary if injuries do, start to pile up.
Yeah, no, it is really the hardest position, I think, outside of quarterback to play in all of football, especially with the rules going really heavily against the defensive backs. Wide receivers get away with so much, and we see it almost every game. But yeah, I understand what you're saying too. There is that drop off on a lot of teams. I just, I've heard you talk about in the Slack channel, and I've seen some things that you've put out there on Twitter about Phillip Gaines. And that concerns me. I think that as a role player, I think McDermott and Frazier can get him into some positions to have some success. But if something happens to one of these top two cornerbacks on the team and he has to play a big, significant role in the defense, that's where I start to get really concerned. Because I also, Johnson's a rookie, also not sold on him as a pick. Sear Neal to me is very much a project kind of guy. And then there's a couple undrafted guys. I don't know, man. I'm super scared about Philip Gaines as that wild card in this defensive backfield.
My thing is, we do have some changes in the secondary when you talk about, that the second and third group or second or third wave. But you also got to take into account that we're expecting, the defensive line to be a little better and to, create a better pass rush. So how much, does it even out there? So maybe we have a little drop off in the secondary, but we have, a boost along the defensive line when it comes to pressure. So those things are going to play hand in hand this year. I mean, we were one of the worst teams as far as creating pressure, whether you're blitzing or not, last year. So, and you saw how good that secondary was. So maybe the talent isn't as good in the secondary this year, and they're more relying on, the quarterback not holding the ball as long and pushing the ball down the field. And then the secondary can, hold up coverage a little bit better, or jump, or squat routes a little more and make plays on the ball, kind of like they did last year. So we'll see how that evens out.
Yeah, and to that point too, obviously, more athletic linebackers are going to help, help in coverage. Obviously, you're very high on Edmonds there in pass coverage, so that should help as well. I want to get back a little bit to the starters because we kind of passed over Tre'Davious White, and I know you've been high on him since the draft. When I saw your kind of analysis of White, I started texting all my friends. I'm like, I think the Bills got a 10-year starter. That's his floor. This guy's a 10-year starter in the league, and I was happy with that. And he way over exceeded all my expectations of being a 10-year starter floor guy. I now think that we have the next. This might be the crazy fan of me, but I think we have one of the next best lockdown cornerbacks in the league. If he continues on the pace that he showed that he can lay the foundation of as a rookie. How excited are you about Tre'Davious White and his future?
I'm excited, but I'm also I'm not surprised, obviously, with his output last year, but I'm also not overjoyed because I feel like he's going to keep steady. You know what I mean? Yeah. He's going to be a steady player because, I mean, if you look at his stats and if you want to look at some of his analytics, technically he gave up a lot of stats. He gave up, 39 receptions for 600 yards. That's a lot. 600 yards is a lot with a 15-yard average. But of course, that with the defense and how much zone coverage we played, you're going to give up those things. And a lot of the times those are, deep comebacks, deep outs, everything in front of you.
Couple rookie mistakes in there.
Sure. A couple. I mean, a really nice throw from Andy Dalton to AJ Green up just over the top of his hands, or Trey White's hands. So, I mean, he did give up some big plays, but I think he's status quo, man. I really think he's such a cool, cool cat where his play is always going to be consistent. You can always count on him. He'll have a couple plays where, may have a lapse or he may jump a double move. But I think for the most part, I mean, he's such a steady player in zone, in man, in tackling. He plays at such a high level across the board. I don't think he can really top last year, but I think he can remain steady and consistent and almost match it, pound for pound what he did last year.
Yeah, and you brought up tackling, and that actually is one of the things that impressed me the most between the previous, I don't even know, 10, 15 years of defensive backs in Buffalo to this past season was all across the board. I thought the tackling was fantastic, and that includes Leonard Johnson in the slot. I thought, even when plays were given up, passing yards were given up, they had a little bit of that bend but don't break. Guys were always in position, taking good angles, making plays on the ball. And you saw a few turnovers come over from that short tackling by the defensive backs. Do you, without Johnson and Gaines, are we going to see that with the new additions of Philip Gaines and Vontae Davis? How are they at tackling? Are we going to see a drop off there at all?
I'm not too high on Philip Gaines' tackling, but I think it depends on where he's playing. I don't like him as a tackler along the edge as a force player. If he's in the nickel role outside, I don't worry as much because he'll have, his safeties helping him out. And a lot of times those guys are covering the C and D gaps in the run game, coming down and supporting. I mean, you're right, man. I don't think that's talked about enough as far as the tackling goes from the secondary, because if you look at some of the solo tackle stats from last year, Preston Brown was #1 from the linebacker position. But after that, here, listen to this. Micah Hyde was number 2. Jordan Poyer was number 3. Tre'Davious White was number 4. Humber was number 5, but then Gaines was right behind him. So, I mean, basically your entire secondary was almost tops of your team in tackles. And a lot of people will say, well, that's not a good thing. But no, the Bills play a lot of cover 3. The Bills play a lot of, 2 high sets where they're in quarters coverage. And like I said, those safeties are coming up in run support. So I'm not surprised by that, but you have to execute it. I mean, you have to give them credit because they executed, they made those tackles. And like you said, some of those tackles led to turnovers. And that was by far the best tackling season for the secondary in a really long time. I could definitely echo those sentiments from you, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, my dad's a big Packers fan, and his biggest gripe all the time is watching his secondary not be able to tackle. And I think it is an underrated thing around the league. They don't always make the prettiest tackles. They don't always make, the biggest hits. But just having the ability to be a guy that's out in coverage and still come up in the run game and make a play and help your defense out provides huge versatility for this team. Before we get kind of into this depth and some of these new faces, deep, rookies and stuff like that, do you think, take off your fan hat for a second, because I know my opinion on this. Do you think Jordan Poyer was robbed of a Pro Bowl appearance this year?
Hands down. I mean, but then again, I mean, he had his partner, got it. But man, what he did last year, and you showed some of those clips. I mean, the guy, and when you talk about hitting on a free agent, prospect, they hit really hard on those 2 guys. They really hit on Hyde and Poyer, and their abilities. That the scouts knew immediately how these guys were going to fit in, and that's one thing I love, having gone through the scouting academy and scouting every year, obviously, and scout weekly when it comes to upcoming opponents and all that stuff. I love that the pro personnel side, the pro scouts, are able to outline a good game plan for the coaches. I love how in the offseason, when Bean and his guys are starting to put their draft boards together, those guys are finding guys that fit. And when you have your front office and your as far as general manager Brandon Bean and your scouts matching up really well, or being in lockstep with your coaches, that's a special thing. And that's how you build organizations. It's how you build winning organizations. And so I do think that they hit on Jordan Poyer, and hopefully we can get a couple more of those guys this coming season.
Yeah, man, I think it's a great point you bring up too, because I think this time of year you see a lot of these national guys giving bad rankings to the Bills. We saw last year with the secondary, and I think one of the reasons was they brought in Jordan Poyer, and he was a huge unknown to a lot of these national media members. Obviously, a huge unknown to Bills fans, but if you have a front office and a scouting department that understand, like you said, are in lockstep with what the coach wants, and the coach feels he can get talent, maybe from some of the guys, not bottom of the barrel of guys, but maybe that second tier of guys, then that is going to be very fantastic for your team, because you can build, you're not chasing after the same big names as everybody. So I think that is how they're trying to build. And I'm hoping, we saw with EJ Gaines in the trade last year, when they made that trade, everyone runs to PFF, looks at his overall grade and says, oh, great, who's this guy? Like,
right.
This is going to be terrible. And then when he leaves in free agency, everybody's freaking out because they hit again on that trade, get a good guy that fits their system, plays well for them. And I don't have any reason to believe that they aren't going to do that again, especially at the defensive backfield. But where I get a little bit concerned here, and maybe because you do a lot of the scouting with the college guys, you can calm me down a little bit. Talk to me about the guys that they drafted this year, because I don't understand where Taron Johnson fits as a draft pick, especially I hate to be that guy. There's a lot of receivers on the board and they go Johnson. I haven't seen much of him. Can you give me a little bit of who this guy is and what we should expect out of him?
The one thing that stood out to me when I watched a few of his games from the coaches film, obviously his height, according to Mock Draftable, was, 5'11" and 1/8, 192 pounds. But the one thing that worried me was his arm length. His arm length was 30 and 7/8. And to me, that worries me, especially when you're talking about from the slot position, because a lot of times you're going to be, chasing guys over the middle. You want to disrupt, when they're coming at you and trying to gain leverage on you. You want to be able to get your hands on these guys. And a lot of the guys that I had scouted thinking the Bills were going to like were guys that either were very fast and able to, stay with guys in man coverage because of their footwork or their foot speed. Well, he's not really that kind of guy. He ran in the 4.5s, short arms. I feel like he got beat a lot on those crossing routes and even on some of those, outbreaking routes. But I saw some decent plays from him when he bumped outside a little more. But he's not afraid. I know, I'm kind of harping on him as far as his length and his speed, but he's not afraid to mix it up. And that's what they love. They love that competitiveness. And so until he steps on the field in the NFL, I mean, I'm not gonna harp on him too much, just because again, these scouts have done their homework, and if they felt they needed to take him, then they needed to take him. And one last note is, if you go to Mock Draftable, you type in Trevon Johnson, the first comp that shows up, EJ Gaines, 86.6%. So there's something there. Just let's hope that the Bills drafted a guy that can play almost to EJ Gaines level, but is available more.
Yeah, I just, obviously not being a scout, I just go and look at stuff, and you see that he's from a small school. I know I'd heard you mention that before about his shorter length, and you see the small school, and then you go and watch some of the stuff. It doesn't really stand out to me as, necessarily the best player on the field. And if you're going to draft a guy from a small school, I feel like, for me at least, I want him to see him just stand out light years above everybody else that he's on the field with.
Oh, hands down, Aaron. That's a great point, because, front offices aren't scared to draft small school guys, but usually those small school guys, they dominate competition, and or they're, elite athletes that just got stuck at the wrong level and, weren't discovered coming out of high school. So that's a great point, dude.
Yeah, and one guy that I do feel like when I watched him, and I'm big on him, and I this might be the comeback to bite me at some point, but Sear Neal stood out to me when the limited that we've been able to see from him, but he looked like the most physically dominant guy on his team and on the field in his small school. Can you tell us about him? Or you got any excitement here? I know you mentioned maybe a future role for him as a developmental guy. Where are you seeing him fitting into this team?
Well, I think eventually he's going to fall into that, that Buffalo nickel, that big nickel role, which is why Babbage, the linebackers coach, was working with him a lot, leading up to the draft. And then, of course, he's been working with him day in and day out at practices. So I think eventually he will grow into that role. I don't think right now he's quite big enough to play that a la Shaq Thompson, but I think he's got the head. I think he's got the physicalness. I think he's got the, the big hit ability that, really gets a defense amped up. And you saw that if you watch all his highlights, you see that every clip almost. I mean, the guy is remarkably. Yeah, he's just a physical player. And then, you throw in special teams, and you'll see a clip here in a few minutes of him as a gunner, getting down. I love this hit right here. Boom, 4th down.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just ridiculous. So he's got that physicality, and I think he can grow into that role. I don't think he'll be ready, but I have heard that the Buffalo nickel, that big nickel, is installed this year. It's just, trying to find that right player to fit that role. So it's a work in progress, but I think eventually they're going to use it, and they're going to use it according to Zoe. They're going to use it a lot versus 21 personnel. So a lot of, run heavy teams that have good tight ends or running backs that can still, throw the ball down the field from those personnel groupings, and versus 12 personnel. So anytime you have a team like the Saints, or obviously the Patriots that have 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends, the Eagles that can, push down the field. You want a guy that can cover, but, obviously cover the tight end, but play with the physicality against one of those guys, and obviously tackle. So, and he's shown that he could do that.
Yeah, no. And I think, we talked about it a little bit on the last podcast, because we did mention him in the linebackers because of the conversation you were just having.
Yep.
And I think that a good way to bring him in, I think that he can make an impact this year, similar to how Milano did. I think if he comes out and really shows off, obviously coming from a lot smaller school, it's a bigger jump into the NFL. But I think late in the year, he could come on and be that guy. Because when you talk about that big nickel, the Buffalo nickel position, he screams that to me.
It's kind of like that player right there. Yeah. I mean, the thing that worried me, because obviously I went down to the Senior Bowl, and he was there, and he struggled. He struggled a lot when they put him at the line of scrimmage and had him try to jam receivers at the line of scrimmage, he struggled because he doesn't have that hip flexibility. He doesn't have the feet that are needed to stay with these shifty receivers. But if you get him in space like this, where he's almost like Milano was at Boston College, where he can use his eyes, use his instincts, and obviously that tackling ability in space, I think that role is perfect for him. Again, I think he's going to grow into it, but he does have a spot there, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the special teams alone, I think, is going to be where he really stands out this year. And I think that versatility and him being a special teams guy, I think Crossman's going to fall in love with him. And I think that's going to give him some more flexibility at other positions on the roster where there's some guys that are pretty good special teams guys, but aren't great at their position. And they'll be able to keep a guy like this tucked away. A couple other guys, man, that I do this every year, though. I fall in love with some undrafted free agents. I can't help myself. Usually it doesn't work out in my favor, but I like to see the potential in these kids. They're always good stories, the undrafted guys. You always root for the underdog, especially if you're a Bills fan. Well, one of them isn't one of our undrafted guys. Came over from the Raiders, right? What's his name?
Breon Borders?
Yeah, Breon Borders, a guy from the Raiders. I know you posted something about him earlier. You know more than I don't know much about this kid. Should I get excited about him as well as our other undrafteds?
You know, I wouldn't at this point. I haven't heard much about him. Honestly, okay. You would hear him. Oh, he made a great play, flashed in OTAs or or mini camp, whatever. I haven't heard too much about him, which kind of worries me. But coming from Duke a couple years ago, I mean, I thought that he's a project still, but he does offer some versatility, as something we always talk about. It seems because they. And mainly in college, he played outside, but then when he was with the Raiders, they bumped him inside. But they loved him in Oakland. Everyone you talked to about Borders, they loved him, and they were upset because something to do with he was being stashed on the practice squad for another position, but it was for some bum player, and they end up losing him to us. So they were upset when we got him.
Yeah. I think that happens a lot, man. The practice squad guys, I know people don't think of them as, they are development guys, and you really don't want to lose some of these guys. And I think you take some risks in training camp when you put some of them out there. And I do think the Bills have two on the roster that they brought in this year that I don't think that they're going to get spots on the 53, but I think they're going to want to stash them on the practice squad. And I think teams might bite on these guys. And so one of them might make their way into the 53, and that's Levi Wallace and Ryan Carter. And I like them both. I like Levi Wallace a little bit more. And I think he should have been drafted maybe. And then Ryan Carter, I've liked what I've seen there. Am I getting overhyped on the undrafted free agent guys here, man, or make me pump the brakes or something?
No, I mean, I think it's again, it's one of those positions that after your top 2 or 3 guys, you're gonna have a talent drop off. So guys like Levi Wallace, someone that was very productive in college at one of the best programs and one of the toughest defenses for a few years. A walk on who he earned a starting role. You got to give guys like him. You root for guys like him, right? I mean, I think there's a couple 2 or 3 of those every year. And I think Levi Wallace has a chance to really, solidify himself in the NFL. I don't know if that's on the practice squad or the open day roster. I think it's a long shot, but the guy is super competitive. He made a lot of plays on the ball at Alabama. And with him, he's just lanky. He's really, his lower body is very thin, and he's real thin, honestly. But he's got the pedigree, comes from a good family, according to all sources. And I think he's just going to compete. And you saw that down at the Senior Bowl. You saw that his whole career. He just doesn't back down. I mean, you may beat him on a deep comeback, but guess what? He's going to be up in your face the very next play in that press coverage. And he can play a little bit of both. He can play a little bit of zone and that bail technique, that Saban shuffle that he likes to run down there in Alabama. And he can also, like I said, he can play with his hands. He can be physical. But he does get bullied sometimes, and you can see that. He just needs to build his strength, and I think that I'm with him, man. I think he's a guy that I'm watching closely once training camp starts.
Yeah, and it sounds like a perfect opportunity for a guy to be on a practice squad, right? Get in an NFL facility, you're becoming a more filling out your body as a man. Give that whole year to really bulk up and learn the position. But the intangibles, like you said, being a walk on and going on to Alabama is no joke. We just talked about the small school thing. This guy could have gone to a small school and been that guy that just stood out on tape to every single scout that watched him. Instead, he believes in himself, walks on it, the biggest program in America. And Saban had nothing but praise for the guy, in his study and in his work ethic. Right. So that, to me, you can't teach that stuff. I think you can get bulkier and teach the rest of the things. So I'm super excited to see what he brings to this team. And to me, the fact that he did it at a big school makes me more excited, I think, than even Johnson, who we picked, because I just didn't see the standout at a smaller school. Not to pick on Johnson there, just that I'm really excited. I think that this was a draftable player that fell into the undrafted market.
No doubt about it, man. You mentioned Ryan Carter from Clemson. I think he's another guy that I don't know if he makes a squad. I don't know if he makes a practice squad. He seems more of like a nickel corner, but I mean, he played in a bunch of games at Clemson in, the Brett Venables defense. And again, that's another one of those complex defenses against some of the top competition in the college ranks. I mean, he played in, 34 games. I mean, that's really, really good for a guy that only played 3 years. So I think I don't know if he's going to make the squad. I don't know if he's going to make the practice squad, but getting a smart guy like that, who maybe doesn't have the elite physical measurables, but has the mental that can make up for that. You never know. You never know with these guys, and we'll see how he pans out.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to. We've talked about it in every position group, and we talk about some of these bottom roster guys, especially at the wide receiver position. You can't stash them all in the practice squad, right? So there's definitely going to be some tough choices. I know that we've talked about it. The national media guys aren't high on this Bills roster. I think they're one of the worst, but I do think they work that bottom 53 all season long. I actually think they have nice depth at a lot of the positions, some nice young talent that they are trying to bring along in developmental. They might not be good in 2018, 2019, but I think they have some potential to be really good in the future. A couple of guys we didn't really touch on. We got Lafayette Pitts. I think he's just kind of floating around the roster right now. Yeah. Obviously more of a special teamer. But I think that role is there's too many of those guys on the team this year. I don't know if Pitts sticks, man. What do you?
Yeah, I mean, he didn't play much last year. I think he got 30. I'm seeing 41 snaps. Yeah. His highest was 19 snaps against New England in week 13. But I didn't see much from him. Obviously, there was not too much film as far as NFL film goes on him. But again, he has been in the system. So when you're talking about these undrafted guys versus, maybe he's one of the last DBs that they, that they're pushing to kick off the squad, and you got Carter and Levi Wallace pushing for Pitts' position. I mean, you never know, but I mean, he knows the defense, and he probably has the leg up as we speak.
Going into camp. Yeah, sure. And a guy we didn't talk about, which I actually think is a really good under the radar pickup, was Raphael Bush. They needed some depth at safety because that's obviously a concern if Jordan or Micah go down. We talked about drop-offs last year. It was unbelievable, the drop-off at safety. And so at least I think you get a guy that's a vet who has had some success in the league towards the end of his career here. I think that's a good, sneaky good pickup for some depth position at the safety position in case of an injury, or even just spot play during a game if a guy needs a break. I don't feel as bad about the drop off there if he can come in. Do you know anything about Bush?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't watch too much on him just because I think he's someone to watch as far as maybe on the bubble. Yeah. If a younger player starts stepping up in camp and he's pushing for that position, you could see him be cut. But I mean, last year, according to Pro Football Focus, he was targeted 20 times, gave up 13 receptions, 2 touchdowns. To me, from what I remember of Bush, because again, I didn't watch him thoroughly, solid tackler, guy that can cover that hook to curl the flat zone. And besides that, I don't see too much from him. He came in the league in 2010. So he's seen it all. He's definitely played his fair amount of football in the NFL, but I just don't think he has the the physical measurables to be asked to play, a bunch of snaps if they go to a 3-safety look. I think then you're going to see Neal be inserted as that quasi safety linebacker.
Yes.
So yeah. So I think he's another person to just keep an eye on. I think he's more than likely, off the squad than he would be on it. But again, it's one of those things. If he's a heady guy and picks up this defense quickly, he could be he could stay on the roster. You never know.
Absolutely. I do feel like they're going to want some of that veteran presence. One guy that is not on our roster, we haven't been talking about, but I think is a sneaky guy to be coming back to this roster somewhere in the summer. We've talked about it before. I want to get your take on the record. You think the Bills bring back Leonard Johnson?
It's interesting that he hasn't been picked up. He's still out there. So as someone said in the chat box, I really like the guy. I didn't like when I watched his film coming into the season, I was scared, kind of like this year, but he was so important to that secondary because, it's not often talked about how important the nickel position is, because a lot of times the nickel position is that gel between the secondary, the corners and the safeties, and then the linebackers, because he's that overlap between those two areas and those two, groups. So a lot of times, that's the important position, and he's always communicating with the DBs behind him about what the linebackers are doing on this play. So he ties it all together. And then you add in the fact that he obviously played in the system for many years, and he was a wicked good tackler.
Super good tackler, yeah.
And a good cook from what I hear. So
yes, I saw that. You brought up a great point, though, because I've had this argument a bunch, and the slot cornerback, obviously, people just think of it as the third least talented cornerback on the team. And while a lot of the cases it is, you have your more superior athletes end up getting back on the outside because that's where the more superior wide receivers are. But more and more offensive coordinators are trying to make matchup issues for that slot guy because it is such a hard position to play. You have so much more field if you've ever played cornerback, when you're out on the outside, it's a little bit nicer because he can only go so far to the outside on you.
Yeah, you have the boundary.
You have the whole boundary, and that's a nice security blanket for a cornerback. When you're in the middle of it, when you're playing slot, man, you have no idea where guys are going, what they're trying to match up, they're trying to get you in. So I think it's an underrated position of how difficult it is to be a good slot corner in this league, especially with the way OCs are trying to get those matchups across the middle.
I totally agree with you. I mean, you think about in the news recently with Sammy Watkins and him being moved around. Andy Reid's moving him around a lot more, putting him in the slot a lot more. And you have tight ends like Jimmy Graham or Gronkowski
Kelsey.
that are being thrown in the slot. I mean, come on. I mean, it's a tough position. And like you said, from the nickel position, from that slot position, your guys basically get a two-way go. Whereas when you're on the outside, you can use that boundary as your protection, as your leverage, as another defender. So you're not totally out on an island as you are as a slot corner, but he was very important, especially with as much cover 3 that we played last year. Being able to redirect that seam route and take some speed off that seam route, so that they can't just fly down the seams and down the numbers. You got to help out your safeties, and Leonard Johnson was a huge part of that. Huge part of the reason why the Bills only gave up 16 touchdowns last year. So if he's out there still, and you see some of these guys in camp struggling, or if you see some of them get hurt, I wouldn't be surprised if they brought him back. I mean, again, I think he's limited as far as
absolutely,
physically, but the guy's a gamer. A gamer. He knows the scheme, and you could bring him in 2 weeks in the season, and guess what? He could start. That's how good he is in this defense.
That's what I'm excited about for him. I think that it's nice to know that there's a guy out there still that you know what you're getting. And so you let EJ or you let Philip Gaines go for a little bit in the summer and see what he's got. And if Frazier sits down with McDermott and says, you know what, this guy's just not what we thought he was, you still have Leonard Johnson out there, hopefully. So definitely a name to keep an eye on. If you follow me on Twitter, I'll probably be calling for him all summer long, saying we need to bring back. I might even start a hashtag bring back Johnson just for Leonard. He's one of my favorites. So Erik, what are you working on, man? You are a busy dude. So what have you got rolling this week for content?
Man, with the holiday coming up, I'm actually coming home. We're gonna hang in with the boys. I'll be meeting up with you, obviously all the Cover One guys in Buffalo. Also we're gonna hook up with Drew and over at the Rock Power Report and those guys, and we're gonna be hooking up with them. So I'm trying to get all this content ready for vacation because I'll be going off for about a week. So I want to get some content out, or at least ready, so that I can drop it while I am on vacation. So today I finished a piece on Zay Jones. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I totally ripped him, because I didn't. I actually looked at some of his positives, because I think when you talk about Zay Jones in his rookie year and not just on the field, you talk about him off the field. I think we all know the story, Aaron. I think we all know it. And I at Cover One, we don't want to tell the same story. So I dove deep, man. I dove deep and found a few plays of his that will give, a lot of the readers hope that he can still, be the player that we thought he was coming out. So I believe that we're going to drop that tomorrow. I'll be dropping another piece for The Athletic here in the next couple of days. And I'll be studying Charles Clay, and actually was doing some of the video for that today. So that's two big stories that I'll be dropping here in the next few days. Obviously, subscribe to our premium content. Join our Slack channel. It's pretty cool. And a lot of the stuff that we write and that we create content-wise comes from our subscribers. I mean, it comes from you guys. So come in there. We're gonna start once the summer settles in and I'm back, back home and everything. We're gonna start doing some film sessions. I'm gonna show you how to watch some film, and that'll be fun. And I think one of the big draws for our brand here in the next couple months. And as far as Athletic, again, go subscribe to them too, because there's some great writers over there. I mean, top of the line writers. I'm honored and honestly really proud and almost surprised that I'm even in the same group as them, because these guys are top notch. And I'm not just talking the Athletic Buffalo. These are guys that across the country, I read all the other team stuff now, because that brand is so good and that their content is, the quality is so good. So, again, subscribe to both Athletic Buffalo, obviously Cover One. And I appreciate, the last minute been bringing me on, Aaron. I know it was, we kind of winged it here, but that's the way it goes sometimes.
Oh man, it's great that you can come on. And I just to kind of touch on what Erik was talking about. I was a fan of Cover One before Erik gave me the opportunity to come on and help out with the crew. And that film room session thing is one of the coolest things, I think, because the reason I reached out to Erik in the first place was I was learning so much from following him on Twitter and reading the stuff. So to get that next layer of that and be able to sit down with guys that know how to break down film, because I don't know how. When I watch football purely as a fan, do the eye test. I'm just a regular dude, but I always want to learn more about the game. And this is going to give you the opportunity to sit down with obviously people that know the game, know how to watch film, so you can learn a little bit about it. I think I can speak for all the premium subscribers because I see the conversations that happen in there. And that's kind of what you get, especially with the Slack channel. And I think that's where the value for me is guys are all the time. They say, hey, I saw this. Erik, what do you think about this? Or Nate, what are you seeing here? And you have instant access pretty much to all these guys. And it starts really cool conversations with guys like myself who are just like you and the other subscribers and guys that really know the game. And some of these subscribers, man, I think that they could host this show for me because they definitely out football me all the time. So definitely worth just getting in and having this conversation with guys like Erik and the other premium subscribers. It's a really cool thing that we got going on over there. So before we let you guys go, just remember to go download the app, iOS, Android. Don't forget to go check us out on everywhere you find your podcasts. Give us a subscribe, a review. We really appreciate it. We can't do this without the fans. You guys keep us going. So definitely help us out there and give us their good review. Follow us on all the social media platforms and get over onto YouTube and subscribe over there so you get notified when we do go live, because we're doing this every Wednesday. We got a ton of cool things in the pipeline coming up, and I can't wait to share them with you guys. As always, thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next one.